Hey guys, what's up? It's Kevin for the win, and we're back for another edition of Diablo 3. Today on the channel, we're going to be playing the Season 22 starter build for the monk known as the Patterns of Justice set. So this is what the set does. It's basically a sweeping wind set that is buffed up thanks to Tempest. So as you can see there, the 2-piece bonus gives you movement speed when Sweeping Wind is activated. When you activate Tempest Rush, you reduce the amount of damage that you take, and your spirit regeneration goes up by 50. And when you have the 6-piece bonus, whenever you activate Tempest Rush while Sweeping Wind is active, Sweeping Wind gains a very large area of effect circular thing. So basically, Sweeping Wind expands. So this is a Sweeping Wind set, and because of that, we're going to be using Kyoshiro's Soul to allow us to get 2 stacks whenever we're not actually attacking with this. And then we're pretty much going to be using conventional elements, Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac. Sunwoku Shrines is only there as a temporary placement until we get a Flavor of Time. These are the abilities that we're going to be using: Tempest Rush Flurry, Desert Shroud Epiphany, Sweeping Wind Inner Storm. We're also going to be using Blinding Flash to handle large areas of mobs, Mantra of Salvation, which you could swap out for something else. It's your prerogative there. For abilities on here, this is pretty much it. Very similar to the Tempest Rush Monk build using the Suwonku set. The only difference here is instead of Tempest Rush doing pretty much all your major source of damage, what you're going to end up wanting to do is actually have your basic Sweeping Wind doing most of the damage this time around. Now, keep in mind, in the KNOX cube, I have the Ring of Royal Grandeur. That is really, it could be anything, really. I put it in there in case I had gotten a very good pair of Captain Crimson set, because you could use Captain Crimson on here to give yourself a little bit more power. If not, though, you can also swap out some of the other things that are available on this particular armor set to use. So that's really a matter of your prerogative here. So I'm going to start off with a Greater Rift of 60. Then we're going to do 65, a 70, a 75, and maybe time for 80. So automatically, when you get into the Greater Rift, what you're wanting to do is automatically set up a Sweeping Wind, and from there you're just pretty much going to hold in Tempest Rush pretty much all the way through. And as you can see, the minute you activate your Tempest Rush and it actually hits one of the mobs, you're going to get the very large area of effect for Sweeping Wind. So think of it as a gigantic version of Sweeping Wind, and that gigantic cone or that circular radius is where all your major source of damage is going to be dealt with the Patterns of Justice set. Now, it could be argued which of the two armors is better if you are a fan of Suwonku Tempest Rush. Basically, that uses Tempest Rush with decoys to do damage. I personally feel like Patterns of Justice actually does a bit better. It's a lot faster. You have less worries in regards to having to micromanage when you use your spirit, because thanks to the fact that of the 4-piece bonus, whenever you click in Tempest Rush, you are going to get back spirit. It automatically regenerates it by 50. So you pretty much, when you have this very optimized, you can pretty much run through Greater Rifts, and in theory, keep in mind, you could literally just keep hold in Tempest Rush, and you should, as long as you're running into large areas of densely populated mobs, be able to always pretty much have your spirit within at least 100% to 75% of it. So you could do a lot with the set. It's very powerful. It's one of the newer sets that was introduced for the month. That was actually the last new set. For those of you who've been playing Season 22 with Diablo, you already know that all the armors that will be featured for the starter set this particular season were the last armors for each class that have been released over the course of this year. So pretty much this is all you're really going to be doing for the most part. It's Tempest Rush and Sweeping Wind. Always make sure you have Sweeping Wind active. Honestly, because of Kyoshiro's Soul, which is the belt we're using, we're always going to have 2 stacks of Sweeping Wind active when we're not actually in battle or we're not moving around, really. So that becomes quite handy in certain situations because we don't have to worry so much, as opposed to Tempest Rush Monk Suwoku, where we're constantly having to keep up the stacks of Tempest Rush, which kind of burns through a lot of your spirit, I should note there. So again, pretty much what you can really do from this particular armor is basically run straight through just about everything. You don't necessarily have to go back into circular motions unless you want to get the orbs like me. Ideally, what you're going to be noticing if your armor is pretty much rare pieces, not even we're talking any augmentations in any of this armor as of yet, but just this is a pretty much naked one. I haven't augmented any legendary gems into any of the armor slot, and we're pretty much ripping through greater of 60, 65, 70, 75, and even 80 within 2 to 3 minute clear times, which is just a testament to insanely powerful. As you saw in my KNOX cube, I just kind of forgot to take out the Ring Royal Grandeur for something else. You could really put a Flavor of Time in there. Honestly, you probably want to run a Flavor of Time for your necklace slot if you have it available. Like I said, I haven't gotten another one that for use for this particular armor. It was all about trying to push this one out to show you exactly how this will work for you if you were selected monk for Season 22 of Diablo. So that was a very, 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 very fast rate for the particular Greater Rift that we just did. So let's see what we got here. Alright, everything looks pretty good at the moment here. So let's see. This should be about 3 minute clear time, I would say. Let's see. Yep, 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So this is going to be a Greater Rift 65. Same strategy. The minute you get into the Greater Rift, set a sweeping wind up and then automatically start holding in Tempest. Once you get Tempest active, pretty much you're going to be able to steamroll through just about anything. Ideally, this armor does best when you're in dungeon layouts where the mobs are just coming at you in large amounts of piles, and you can just constantly have that large order of sweeping wind active. It doesn't do as well with the longer corridor, particular dungeon layouts where they're long twists and turns and there's not a lot of wide open area. As always, when you're building this armor, or if you're trying to get this the most optimized, I should say, it's really about having high crit hit ratio in your helm, high hit crit ratio and crit hit damage in your gloves, because you want to be able to do the maximum amount of damage potentially possible. Wherever you can, you would probably want to have, in this particular case, you're not going to rely so much on cooldown, so area of effect could be a bit more useful for you because of the large circular area. You'll be able to do a lot more area of effect with sweeping winds, so that's something to keep in mind. You could, though, ideally, if you get primal ancient legendary pieces, look for cooldown and pretty much area of effect wherever you can necessarily fit that in. Another thing that you definitely want to look into is wherever you can get 15% for sweeping wind or tempest, definitely try to make sure to do that, because that will be able to maximize the amount of power and damage that you're dealing out. Now, as for some of the other abilities, which you don't really use too much of in this particular armor setup, Blinding Flash basically would be used for when we're in a fight against elite packs that we see are taking way too long to deal with. In that case, what you're going to want to do is hit them with a Blinding Flash first, and then basically run into them, as you will be doing a lot of damage. For the legendary gems on this particular armor, I personally would recommend Bane of the Stricken, Bane of the Trap, and you could basically a toss-up between Goak of Swiftness or Bane of the Powerful. Bane of the Powerful will do you pretty well for the first couple of Greater Rifts until you get to about 80. Then pretty much it's going to become useless at that point. You might as well just use it for augmentation fodder. So I would recommend Goak of Swiftness, just because you'll always pretty much have a very fast cooldown on just about everything there. And you don't really have to then rely so much in your armor having cooldown, because keep in mind, this is really one of those things where you're constantly going to be channeling. So, you know, that's what the mantle of channeling in KNOX Cube really comes into play quite a bit. So, in theory, since this is basically a channel build, I would even forego the Goak of Swiftness and just use a Tegook, just so that you can get a bit more mileage out of that. So, level 70 Tegook, a level 70 or higher Bane of the Stricken, and a Bane of the Trap. The reason for Bane of the Trap is because you're doing a large area of effect, and if you've augmented the gem past 25, you have about 50% chance that it will cost slow on its own. So and because there's such a large cone of effect, it's just we'll be able to procure a lot more slows and be able to do a lot more damage that way, which is why it's probably in your best interest to look into using Bane of the Trapped, along with Bane of the Stricken as well, because remember that cone, as it's constantly circling against an enemy, is constantly doing damage, and if you're constantly doing damage, your Bane of the Stricken is going off pretty much repeatedly at that point, so that's why you want to particularly go with those particular gems here. I will say this is probably one of the best sets to work with in regards to Season 22 of Diablo, because it's the one that requires the least amount of setup. You can basically run this with all 6 pieces perfectly, and just get the Kyoshiro's belt as I'm doing here, and you see you can pretty much handle just about everything as long as you are looking for optimal stats, you know, high hit crit ratio. If you could get attack on your gloves as well, besides crit hit damage, crit hit ratio, that would be basically in your benefit as well. But it's a very easy, simplistic armor to use, very newbie friendly, I should say. So if you're new to Diablo and you've been interested in playing the monk, this is probably one of the easier monk sets to use and to be able to use it effectively and to get higher up into your seasonal challenge. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with how Diablo season works, you select a character class, and then you have to work it up to level 70, and then also grind for Paragon afterwards. But you basically will be given about 13 chapters of challenges, and basically what you'll be doing in those 13 chapters of challenges is trying to complete objectives, and when you complete all the objectives within a seasonal journey chapter, you receive a reward. So this is where the starter set armor, this particular one we're using, comes into play. For Chapter 2, 3, and 4 of your seasonal journey, upon completion, you will get a Hadrid's Gift for every chapter. So Chapter 2, you get a piece of, you get a Hadrid's Gift. Chapter 3, you get a Hadrid's Gift. Chapter 4, you get a Hadrid's Gift. Each one of those particular rewards will net you 2 pieces of the starter set armor, which is this one that you see here, Patterns of Justice. So you get 2 pieces for Chapter 2, 2 pieces for Chapter 3's completion, 2 pieces for Chapter 4's completion, and you are always guaranteed a full set of the armor. The one thing that is to be kept in mind is that you are not guaranteed Ancient Legendary pieces. Now, Ancient Legendary pieces, for those of you who are not familiar and are always wondering why I'm stressing those the most, give you necessarily the better stats on a particular armor. So if you're going to re-roll them with Death Breaths, you have the optimal chance of getting the highest stat for whatever you're re-rolling. So like if you were re-rolling for the monk, it would be Dexterity. You have a very high chance that you're going to get the full 650 if it's a particular piece of the armor for Dexterity. And you get better, pretty much better rolls and more effective, and you'll be able to do more damage, which is why you want to go that particular way with armors. And that's why when you're doing your seasonal journey and you see that you don't have Ancient Legendary pieces, continue to farm. And as you get Ancient Legendary pieces, keep in mind my helm of Decrees of Justice was Ancient Legendary, for example, there. You will want to, swap out whatever pieces aren't Ancient Legendary for Ancient Legendary pieces. For the weapons, basically, you want the Wamkulim particular fist, as well as a Nerwin, which name evades me at the moment, but it will be available in the description. There's a link to this armor in the description, as I do with every video. And you pretty much want those particular fists because they will not only buff Tempest Rush and give you also Cyclone with Tempest Rush when you're using it, but it'll also buff your Sweeping Wind, which is particularly where, as you see here, all your damage is coming from. That was a nerf 3-minute clear time, so you can see this armor, non-optimized, clears through things incredibly, incredibly, incredibly fast. So we are going to do, I believe this should be a greater with 75. It's going to take us a slightly longer amount of time to clear this particular Greater Rift, only because as you go higher up in the Greater Rift, you go higher up in the difficulty of Torment. So Greater Rift 75 would be the equivalent of Torment 16 difficulty, so enemies have more HP, which means they can take usually a lot more hits. But as you can see here, thanks to the way we have the armor set up, really we don't have to worry too much about those particular things with the mobs. As you can see here, if anything, this armor performs better at the higher Greater Rifts just because the mobs come at you more aggressively, which will allow you to procure a lot more damage and be able to clear through Greater Rifts ironically faster than if you were going through a lower level where sometimes you run into a dry area of mob density where you're not able to fight a lot of mobs or find a lot of elite packs, and then you find yourself pretty much having to run through a lot of things. Now, if you see a little bit of hiccups on this particular gameplay here, don't adjust your TV screens or your computers. That's not on your end. Believe it or not, with this particular armor, since we are going so incredibly fast and we are playing on the Nintendo Switch platform, but keep in mind, any platform that you are playing on, this video will apply to that because the armors work on every single platform the same way. The gameplay works exactly the same. The only difference is people with mouse and keyboard have a bit more precision, so they will be able to go through those tight corners a bit better than me, who has to work with a control stick, so sometimes I'll bump into a wall as opposed to a mouse and keyboard where you get a bit more precision. But everything, all the information here applies to every platform, so no matter what platform you're playing on, it's fine. But on the Nintendo Switch platform, I have noticed with Patterns of Justice, if you're going too quick and there's a lot of mobs on the screen, there is a little bit of stuttering hiccup issues. Sometimes you have a little bit of a feedback issue where it kind of like has this little hiccup, like if it seems like a jump. That's really just kind of unfortunate, but you know, this Nintendo Switch platform, Switch can do very well at this particular port of Diablo, but you know, so many things on screen, it will have a hard time trying to keep up, even on some of the lower NPCs. You would probably have that thing. But as you can see here, Greater of 75 again, pretty much we have not had to release our hand from Tempest Rush. We have not had to worry about running out of Spirit. And we certainly haven't had to worry about running out of Sweeping Wind stacks thanks to Kyoshiro's belt. So as you can see here, this is probably the most optimized you can get. Now, obviously, put in the necklace, I would say definitely maybe a Flavor of Time. Some will argue maybe to put a Compass Rose Traveler's Pledge combination here, those type of particular necklace. I really don't see how those will work in your benefit because you are maybe for the Traveler's Pledge in particular, because when you're moving around, you'll be able to take less damage. That could come in a little bit handy, but I think Flavor of Time would be a little bit better, because the thing about it is really with the set, you're going to be moving around a lot, but you're moving so fast that ideally you're probably not going to be taking a lot of hits because you're moving faster than particularly where the mobs, even stray bullets, will be able to hit. Alright, so that was a very incredibly fast run yet again with the Patterns of Justice. Keep in mind, as I mentioned before, this armor is not optimized. There are no parts of this armor that have been augmented with legendaries. This is completely a naked run for all intents and purposes here. So I'm going to actually level up this Bane of the Powerful because I think it's about time that I'm going to augment this particular gem into this armor for a future installment in the near future. As you can see, my follower is trying to take down an enemy and is having some difficulty there. Alright, let's see what we got here. That was a 4-minute clear time. Alright, so this is going to be a Greater of 80. I can die potentially a lot here because I don't have a lot of armor or vitality, because keep in mind this is, like every video, a work in progress armor. I just like to show people who are just starting out in Diablo or kind of lost with how to run a armor at the beginning of the season exactly what they can do with it in the beginning without particularly optimization. Keep in mind with Diablo 3, no armor is necessarily etched in stone, as you're obviously always going to be switching out for... Oop, I took a stray death there thanks to the fire. It might have been a little aggressive here. This is where finally Epiphany will come in a bit handy, because I can regen that way. My spirit, because I get into a tough spot now, and then thanks to the 4-piece bonus, I'll be able to get back the rest of the spirit. So that's pretty much why you're running Epiphany in particular on this set for the higher greater rifts, when you're gonna have to do a little bit more damage output and you run into the unavoidable death. Keep in mind, when you die in particularly high greater rifts, that just goes to show you that you need to do a bit more optimization in your armor. Oh man, I think we're gonna have to really back away here. Probably go down here a bit so I can build my Sweeping Wind. The problem is we didn't have Sweeping Wind, and then we're kind of running a bit low on our spirit. Alright, there. I will click the Epiphany there so that we would be able to get the maximum amount of damage possible there. So let's see what we got here. Overall, pretty good, I'd say. You know, So again, don't be discouraged if you take a couple of deaths. When you get higher up in the greater rifts, it's very rare that you're ever going to be able to get the 4-piece chance bonus. If you want to do 4-piece chance bonuses, that's something that you have to do and farm on lower levels, and then eventually scale your armor up. So if you start seeing that you're taking a lot of deaths, that's how it's a pretty good indicator that you need to go back and start augmenting legendary gems into your armor, and then looking particularly on your stats to see if you have maxed out crit hit ratio, if you have the highest amount of strength that you can get. Also, you can play around with your gems in your armor. You don't necessarily have to run Royal Flawless Emeralds for maximum amount of dexterity. You could, if you wanted to, put in some of the other gems to give you a little bit more toughness, but for all intents and purposes, since this is a speed build, you want to focus on getting your attack stat the highest possible. That way you will be able to speed through the greater with ease and also be able to. So keep in mind, it's really a matter of just not making careless mistakes, getting not too aggressive or hyper aggro, and obviously keeping a mind on the stray billets. And keep in mind that because you're using this particular set, when you do activate your sweeping wind, you get all 4 effects of the ruin, so that's actually why, in particular, this one's a little bit better for a sweeping wind set as opposed to Sunwoku, because as I've mentioned before in my Sunwoku videos, when it comes to that particular set, the decoys have a weird kind of glitchy type effect. Oh, I got backed into a corner there and stray bullet. Okay, so I'm going to back away here. I'm going to cast an Epiphany. Gonna use my basic attack and try not to die there, but I did. So as you can see, this is a clear indication that I definitely am not fully prepared to handle this. I still will be able to push this Greater Rift before time runs out, certainly. It's just a matter that I have to be a bit more careful with the mobs. Ideally, it's safe to say that this armor naked run, you'll be able to do Greater Rift 75 with ease. At that point, then, it's really to do 80 comfortably, where you're not going to be taking a lot of deaths. You will particularly need to start augmenting into the particular armor slots. As this armor goes, how high up on the tier list, it's debatable right now, considering how well it's performing. I would say it would do pretty well. I would probably put this in. I don't think I would go on a limb and say necessarily A tier, because maybe A tier. I don't think necessarily S tier, because S tier Sunwoku still is considered the S tier set, only because you have a bit more bulkiness and the decoys do a bit more effectiveness because you don't have to run back, such a case in point there, to continue to do the area effect. I like this. This is a very solid armor, at least A tier in my opinion, close to S tier. This will take you very, very far into greater rifts, especially with optimization. I'd say you could probably hit a greater rift 130 when fully optimized, pretty much with general ease. You probably wouldn't be able to solo a greater rift 150, however. So let's see here. This is probably going to be, because of those deaths, around a 6-minute clear time in particular, which is still very, very good for an armor that's not 100% optimized. Oh, actually a 5-minute clear time there, so still very, very, very good for armor that is not fully optimized in the KNOX cube or anything. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next Diablo 3 video.